Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me today. It's been a whistle stop around Eastbourne, going over to Lewes Football Club, the Women's Football Club, and then speaking to the students over in Brighton, just trying to reach out to as many people as possible. Because for me, it's really important that we get behind a lot of the perceptions when we think we know better, or when we think that we know what people are thinking. So I need to get out and around. So we've been, since we launched on the 13th of January, I think we've done Manchester, Leeds, Nottingham, Bradford South, Birmingham. Yeah, we're definitely travelling around a lot, because I think there's this idea that whilst chaos is happening in the world and the tragedies around the world, that we can put everything that's going on at home, the domestic agenda, to one side. I don't think we can do that. Both things need to happen at the same time, because actually they impact each other. And that's where we are. So I'm just going to make, I just scribbled a few notes coming up today, which I'll read to you now. And then I really want to engage with you, to hear from you, because there's a lot to discuss. And I'm afraid 2 years to try and get the system fixed and get the Tories out. So we don't have much time to waste, and we definitely have a lot of work to do. And I think from my point of view, each week that goes by, there is a growing unease around the country. But there is also a country that's descending into depression. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way people are feeling. Some people can articulate it, some can't. They just feel something is wrong, and there's a despair that there is nothing that they can do about it, that nobody's really interested in fixing what's broken. There's also a feeling that because so much has been neglected for the last 20, 30 years, that so much has been cut to the bone, that we didn't address the issues that underlay the financial crisis, global financial crisis, both in the UK and globally, that there has been a growing discontent amongst different groups of society that have basically bubbled up to the top. And how do we put a lid on that? How do we reinvest in those areas that have been cut? How do we mend the divisions that politicians have chosen to exploit to their own gain? And that's very much in people's minds as we're going around the country, consciously or unconsciously. And to put simply, our country is not in a good place. I think we can all agree with that. Especially now, post-COVID, and whatever happens with the Ukraine and Russia. I cannot see that the geopolitical plates will ever go back to where they were before. I don't think the way we live, we work, we even love will go back to the way it was before. But as much as we want change and we want to do the best for future generations, there are other actors who will also take the opportunity to shape the future. And if we sit by and let them lead the charge and fill up the debate and take the oxygen, then I think we will have lost not just for this generation, but for many generations to come. Because this government in particular is absolutely focused on ensuring that the very few checks and balances we have in place already won't be there. I say that it's not by stealth that they're changing our lives, but by statute. If you look at the totality of the acts before Parliament, they're shutting us down in the streets, in the courts, in education, in the media, everywhere you look. We are going to emerge from 2024, if they win another majority government, with an elective dictatorship. And what will happen to our young people if that happens? So I think we are at a crisis point. We thought Brexit was the crisis point. I think we're in a much, much worse place now. And I feel that the only battle in town, if you like, is to get this Tory government out. And if we can't get them out, because it may be too big an ask, with the boundary changes that are coming, with the problems that our particular parties have, with the fact that so many people are saying they're all the same, we don't trust any of them, we just won't vote. That is something else that we're picking up and down the country. We thought that Partygate was going to damage the Conservative government alone. It's not. People are saying they're all the same and they won't vote. And the modelling around that idea that what's the point, we're politically homeless, we won't turn out and vote, is that they could return an even bigger majority than they have today. So that is why we need to step up. People, I'm sure, will get lots of questions about why a political party in the system we have, our voting system we have. But I feel there is no other choice. Because unless we can motivate those people who feel there is no home, there is no hope, that there is no future, then we would have lost this. And it's really important that we talk about what that future might look like. And it's got to be a future about hope. About saying that if we fix the machinery of government, if we can change the checks and balances, if we can attract better people into government, if we can link to young people particularly, that politics is not something that happens in a solitary building and has nothing to do with you, but politics is about policies, and policies are personal. It's about the way you live your life. That's why you have to step up. That's why you have to get involved. If we can tell the story that then you can change and paint that future, then hope we have half a chance. Because as I said, otherwise we will just have such a low turnout that we will be lost. And I am prepared with my team and as many people as we can muster to help us go out there, because it needs to start from the grassroots. For us, success would look like either being the mirror of the Brexit Party, where we can actually create enough groundswell in the court of public opinion that the main political parties can't ignore it. Be it about electoral change, because it is time. Be it about putting in checks and balances on the statute book, because it is time. Be it about more devolved powers and more funding to local communities, it is about time. If it's about re-establishing our reputation on the global landscape, because we're a laughingstock right now, it is about time. And so that is why I'm here. It's why I wanted to chat with you this evening and to hear your views, how we can help you to help us, how we can motivate others to be part of this journey. I'd be delighted to chat with you this evening. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to have a question and answer session with Gina. As she said, she'd love to hear your opinions. And now, in terms of questions, the question and answer session will last for about 40 minutes, and we'd love to get through as many questions as possible. But just remember, for your initial question, not related discussion, but for your initial question, please keep them as short and to the point as possible. So one question, one point.
I'm not guaranteeing that I'll do the same.
You are our guest. And just remember, no questions in 5 parts, no memoirs, and no extensive personal theories disguised as questions. If you need to stop to take a breath in the middle of your question, it is too long. So, Richard here will be looking out for your hands up. And one thing, can you please please speak as loudly as possible for your question, and if necessary, repeat it. And maybe Gina, perhaps you could just
yes,
repeat
of course,
the questions as well.
Of course.
Right, thank you.
Oh, good. Lots of hands.
First past the post, new political party.
So, if, as I said, we can get it into being a conversation that the main parties can't ignore, you have to remember 83% of the Labour membership want first past the post. You have to remember that all the small parties will have it in our manifestos, so that if there is a hung parliament, it'll be a red line, and we've agreed that across all small parties across the spectrum. New party, we aren't in 1988. This is different times. Young people, ethnic minorities, women, the target markets that we are looking to motivate are able to be motivated. We've done the work on that. We will not stand in any seat that will split the vote and let the Tories in. And if that means we don't stand a seat anywhere, then we won't. But that's not where we're planning. At the moment, the polls are quite emotive in their outcome. So it's about COVID, Partygate, now the Ukraine, and Boris, I'm afraid, is back up to where he was just after the election. So
He's bound to fuck up soon.
I know, that's why we want him to stay. We want him to stay. But anyway, let's see what happens there. But the underlying trend is that there will be some seats, which we call the blue wall seats, which the sensible centrist Conservatives who won't walk over to Labour and who are not convinced that Lib Dems have a pro-party agenda or actually will bring in real change. So we do have a chance to focus on those seats, but we can't tell exactly where they are yet. But we will not split the vote, and we are not driven by our pride. And if we have to then stand behind whoever it is going to win those seats, we will do that, even though the electoral law will make it more difficult.
In listing the challenges we face, you seem to have left out the biggest challenge we face, which is climate change.
So climate change, we cannot get anything done on climate change unless we get this government out. Because
this needs to be on your agenda, which it didn't seem to be.
Well, I haven't. Yeah, you're asking the question, so now I can explain. So we call it the three big E's, which is education, environment, and the economy, which sit on the same platform. And actually, we do not see the environment sitting as a single issue that needs to be cut. Every single department needs to have a department of the environment sitting within it, which is actually auditing what that department's output will be in the terms of the environment. So I think at the moment, the environment is seen as a silo or something that you can PR every time there's a conference. But our view is that's not good enough. It's got to actually sit in every single department. It's got to be taught in schools more. We would also look to launch, I don't know if you know the Money Advice Service, that's sort of where you can go and find out information about pensions and ISAs or whatever. We would look to fund a platform for the environment where people can learn about their impact, what they're wearing, eating, how they're living their lives. There are some apps that do that already, but there's no government-funded main platform that gives you that information. And I'm talking about information that is not led by who's doing the latest lobbying on cars, on batteries, on smart meters, whatever it is at the time. It will be led by science. All our policies are made up by data, expertise, and what is actually practical to deliver in communities. Because there are a lot of myths around what's happening with climate. I'll give you an example that if the aviation industry, during COVID, when the world shut down basically, that should have had a massive impact, and it didn't. What really made impact and what you should ban right now is private jets and cruise liners. Cruise liners are doing more damage, so that's just an example. So we have that, but we don't have to put that out there. We're writing an emergency manifesto right now in case there is a challenge to Boris Johnson after the May elections, and the new whoever it is decides that they need a new mandate. They may or may not. That's going to be a challenge for if somebody else takes over from him. So we'll have to have that emergency manifesto there, and that will have, as I said, our three main top lines, apart from modernising our government and bringing in checks and balances, will be about the economy, environment and education. But we'll have policies in all areas. And then, if it's in 2 years' time, then we will have a very detailed environmental agenda because we're working with real experts in this field.
would you agree that a proportional voting system is actually the key to really changing the political culture in this country? And can we achieve it? I mean, is actually some kind of tactical voting or alliance the only way of ensuring that happens?
It will change significantly because I think people will feel that their vote matters and that it is reflected. But I don't think it's the only thing will change because in lots of countries where it works, they have a written constitution or at least a partially codified constitution. It's one tool in the box. It's an important one, but we also need to have checks and balances in place because we don't have that written constitution or something that's codified. And we do have to put, I believe, Prime Minister's powers into law, like the prerogative powers, etc. We do have to have that on the statute. So there are a number of things, and I think we also need to have more devolution, as I said, and more power. So it's an important tool because it creates the feeling that people can trust that their vote matters, and it's about fairness. Yeah. So I think that's very, very important. Do I think it's going to happen? I think unless we try now, I don't think it will happen ever again. I think it will if we don't try now. And the boundary changes come in, and the fixed term acts, and all the things change. I don't think we'll have an opportunity again for a very long time, I'm afraid.
Oh, hi, hello. How deep do you think the Russian influence goes in our political and financial system? Because apart from the topical situation that we're in at the moment, it feels like more and more is being exposed. And certain journalists have exposed it, and it's not really been given much of an airing. But do you think that's going to be a significant? What do you think it is? How far and how powerful is it? And secondly, do you think it's the reason why the Tories might actually be out at the next election?
I wrote a blog on our website called Unbaking the Cake last Monday. It's not the Russians. Don't be sidelined into think it's just the Russians. We have been infiltrated. You know, the Americans have known it. Our MI6 have known it. We've known it. I've been campaigning on outing dirty money in our institutional political systems for 14 years now. I thought the Panama Papers were actually going to be the start of and it didn't. Because it's an international network. It's enablers domestically, but it's also enablers globally. And part of that network of enablers are accountants, lawyers, philanthropy advisors, institutions. It's a hornet's nest. I think what's different about Russia, the Russian money that's been coming in, because it's not only been coming into the UK, the Russians have had a strategy of funding both sides in any country where they could see they could create chaos. It's been about destabilizing democracies. So that's in the US, in the UK, in Scotland with the referendum there, in Catalonia. They've been doing this around the world, and we've been aware of it. But London has been the worst, because what they've managed to do in the UK is not just enter political institutions. They've managed to sit on the boards of charities, of sports clubs. I mean, every part of our society has been infiltrated by Russian money. Mm-hmm. And it's been the biggest open secret in the city or in London. And as much as there are noises now about cleaning it up, we can't undo what's happened here for the last 20, 30 years. And now to suddenly say that we're going to have a closer relationship to Saudi, I mean, we have to choose. If we're going to be a country that stands by morals and values and principles, it has to apply to everyone. And the argument I've always come up with in the city, I remember when there was an oligarch who was being allowed to float his company on the London Stock Exchange, which is sort of my world, the investment world, in 2018 for 1.45 billion. And we all said it's the dodgiest company going, and it was overruled by the government. And you seem to remember Mrs. May with the Saudi company and stock exchange as well. The argument I always got told was, but they're bringing money to our economy. They're building our economy. But remember, that's an economy that was also, or is, it's less now, 80% services economy. So professional services have also been part of enabling this. So I'm afraid it's really difficult I think it's great that we're making some steps, but the economic sanctions bill that was published on Monday will need 2, 3, 4, 5 more amendments or iterations because it's got so many loopholes and red flags in it. I mean, I'll just point out to you 3. One is this register of properties and ownership. Who's going to actually look over it? Who is going to see if they're entering the right information or not? There's no details. And also, if it's going to be a crime, have you resourced or funded crime agencies to actually overlook it? You can put things on the statute book, but who's actually going to enforce it? And the third one, which I actually had to reread several times, there's a clause in there that says if a company or individual who's been sanctioned or is on the register is deemed to be contributing to our economy, a minister of the government can overrule them being sanctioned or on the register. I mean, it is ludicrous beyond belief, but we need to clean up the company registration, we need to clean up the charity commission, we need to clean up a lot more of the low regulated sectors of professional services, because low regulation does allow you to turn the other cheek. So there's a lot to do, but we have to do it across the board. And I think the Russian money that's come into the Conservative Party has been a particular thing, that it's actually only been the Conservative Party who've received that money. And they have been very successful at doing that. And right now, it's all a bit too late, isn't it? It's a bit too late, but at least I suppose it's better now than never. But there's a lot of work. And we can't let it go off the agenda, because that's what tends to happen, is things hit the headlines and then something else comes along, goes off the agenda, and then everyone forgets about it until the next time it hits the agenda. So I think we just need to make sure that we keep pushing and pushing and saying it is not acceptable, we need to clean this up.
I just wanted to ask you about how you persuade the mainstream voter that honesty and integrity and quality of arguments matters. Because I was talking to my neighbour, and you say, well, people don't tell the truth, they spin it. You go, oh, that's always been the case.
Yeah.
Interesting, my life's never been so good thanks to the Tories. And how do you get, a better argument around better politicians and overcome cynicism?
Well, there's some people who will never convince. We won't, and they don't actually want to hear the issues because they've, it's, as I say, because they almost don't want to believe it's true. So it's very difficult. So we can't convert the people who won't listen, but those who have half an ear open and have seen what's gone on. Actually, COVID has helped. Because for years, since 1997, when I went on my first march against Iraq, which I'm sure maybe some of you in this room did, I've been talking about secondary legislation, some of the stuff that's wrong. But COVID has exposed some of those weaknesses. People have seen the cronyism. They've seen the contracts a waste of money. They've seen Partygate. Some of the government's own behaviour is helping us change the narrative. So we have to thank them for that. But there's also, the young people are much more cynical than us. So I think we need to tap in, and we've looked at this, and you look at sort of young people, women of certain group, ethnic minorities, there are groups that we can talk to, because if we can get the message carriers to go out there and tell it themselves, they're better than us. But it's a combination of techniques that we'll use, social media, storytelling, trying to talk to people who know how to sell Coca-Cola and washing powder, not just politics, and getting them to get involved, because marketing was something actually the other side was much better during Brexit than we were on our side. So it's using all those techniques, but I accept there are some people we're never going to change. And we haven't got the time to do that long game of trying to change people's minds over the next 10 years. We've literally got 2 years or 18 months, maybe even shorter, we don't know.
Thank you very much indeed. My point was just to ask that a lot of the issues you raised about a greedy elite seizing power for itself and ignoring the mass of the population was the way the Brexit campaign was run. Do you have a 3-word slogan or something like that will enable people to see that the judges, the courts, the BBC, the universities, the journalists are in fact on the people's side, and that the slogan of let the elected politicians do whatever they like is itself an elite demand.
You can't tell them that. So what we've tested in, and our slogan is, we deserve better. And people innately know that. They can't always articulate it, but it's that feeling that it's just not fair and that we deserve better. And that lands. People know it, and they can't tell you always why. But we have to go out there and carry on telling them, because we can't, there's certain audiences, when we're up in, be it Bury South, wherever it is, we can't talk about, constitutional change or electoral reform. We just say, so how are you feeling? And they go, bloody angry. And why? And they'll tell us why. And we'll say, well, that's because there's one rule for them, one rule for us. It's because you deserve better and they're not listening to you. So you have to keep it very simple sometimes. But that's the opportunity I think we have now, which we haven't had before. And it may well disappear in a couple of years. So we've got to try and harness it for as much as we can. Because people do have that feeling after COVID that just things aren't right and it's not fair and it is one rule for them, one rule for us. And they got to do this and I didn't. But that might melt away when the neighbour says, but, I'm doing fine. I'm fine under the Tories. Because the other thing coming down the line is the cost of living crisis is going to get worse and worse and worse. And the government at the same time, I'd be very intrigued. I can't wait to see the mini budgets on the 23rd of March. Because I think we're going into austerity 2.0. And if they do that now, it will crucify them. But the other thing they'll then do to stay in power and make people feel better is just before the election, they'll throw money at everything. Mm-hmm. So tax cuts will come down. I mean, it won't be now, it'll just be before. So we have some work to do before they do that so people can see that they're being bribed with their own money, as I tell them. But yeah, I can imagine, I was talking to some senior people in the Labour Party who were saying that they're going to target the red wall seats. And I said, but what happens when the Tories throw even more money at the red wall seats and you won't win them back again? And they said, well, we've got to make a decision. We don't have the funding. We have, the problems under the electoral bill that will change the funding for the Labour Party, if any of you are aware of this. But so they have to make a decision. But that's going to be tough. That's going to be tough. Because this government, by the way, if it's Boris Johnson, he doesn't care if he bankrupts the entire country. He just wants to stay in power and leave it for somebody else to sort it out. So we could be over 110% debt. He doesn't care. It's not his problem.
Yes, I just want to people get to the person like myself. Can you just battle through the vanishing checks and balances?
Okay, so if we go through the bills quickly. So we've got the police and courts bill, which will basically make it illegal to protest or be noisy. It will give the police huge swathes of power so they can decide if you are illegally protesting. There's also going to be a list of people who can't protest and go outside. And you can be in prison for 51 weeks if you do it. So there's lots of closing down of our democratic voice on the streets through that bill and us turning into a police state under that act. Then you've got the judicial review bill, which basically will mean that no individual like myself could ever bring a case against the government again. And on Friday, I don't know if you saw, but the Sarah Everard Vigil won their appeal. That won't be possible either, so they won't be able to bring that judicial review. It will be very hard to use the courts to hold the government to account. You've got the Nationality and Borders Bill, which means that anybody who's naturalised like me, I could come back to Heathrow or Gatwick, and for no reason, I could be stripped of my nationality, and they don't have to tell me what the charge is. There's no right of appeal, and I can't be allowed back in to sort out my affairs. And that's for anybody who they deem is naturalised or has been or is related to somebody elsewhere. So that bill is horrific. Plus the fact that you can actually, every refugee and immigrant is going to be processed offshore. So that's also in that bill. Which other bill? So we've got the elections bill, election reform bill, which will make it almost illegal to do progressive alliances, will be outlawed. It will be very difficult to do tactical voting. It will be very difficult to get funding. The funding cap on the parties means that Labour may well lose funding from the unions. They're increasing foreign money funding. Who gets that? There'll be no cap if you've lived abroad for 15 years. So they will be funded from whoever they like. The independence of the Electoral Commission under that act will be diminished. And finally, under that act, gosh, there's so many things in that 144 pages, which they deliberately leaked the ID cards, by the way. It was a deliberate leak because they knew that would exercise people so that people didn't read the rest of the bill. So it was number 10 who leaked the ID cards. What else is there in the electoral bill? I know. There's lots of things that will change in the elections bill. Oh, that's the other thing that changes it massively. So normally, actually two more things. Normally when you go into an election, you know the Election Commission website, you can go on there, you know the rules of how you can operate as a campaign group, as a charity, whatever it is, in an election period. Whoever holds the office of the Duchy of Lancaster, who at the time was Gove and is now Rab, can decide the day an election is called what the rules of that election will be. So we have no idea what we're going into and if they could backdate it 12 months or 12 years. And then what I've done in the past with my campaigning and tactical voting, etc., the burden of reporting to the Electoral Commission was £250,000 and over, because it is very burdensome. That's going to be reduced to about 10,000. So that's going to make it almost impossible for smaller organisations to campaign during that period. So those bills are horrendous, and there are other security bills coming through. There are other bills that will stop FOIs from media, so that media won't be able to use freedom of information requests. If you think of how much information we've got through media being able to use that, because it will deemed a national security issue if the government decides that. And then to top it all off, every bill going through Parliament has something in it called an ouster clause, which means that that act can't be challenged in a court. So they are completely changing the landscape. And all of these acts are going to go through. We cannot see, there are Lord's amendments that have come into a few of them, but what I'm hearing is Ukraine has put things on the back burner for now, but there's quite a few of them being slipped through at the moment without us really knowing, and suddenly there's another one coming up and another one. But I've been told that they won't have ping pong, so they're not going to be sending a lot of the acts back up to the House of Lords. So they'll just be passed. So I'm afraid it's very grim.
So my question is about the rate of work and capital. So how do you view the vastly changing nature of work and employment and the changing nature of capital and wealth and who holds that?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
So
for the future.
The balance between work and capital is really changing.
Yeah.
Also the nature of work and what we do for a living and how people earn money is vastly changing. So how would you respond to the work versus capital, how you earn money and actually the future of work?
It's a really massive problem, and it is even before COVID, because we're in the fifth revolution, and the estimates are for every 70 jobs, there'll be 5 in the future. And that worries me from so many angles, because you think you've got the aging of our population, you've got less people working. Who's paying taxes is a massive question. Who's going to be paying into the public purse? Who's going to fund public services? So that is a huge question we have to start thinking about. You know, who owns the capital and the assets and is actually going to pay taxes? The other question around that is about retirement, and can we afford as a society to retire, fully retire at the age that we have done in the past? Can we go to school as early as we started? It actually starts all the way down the chain. It's not just one issue versus another. We've got to systemically think about everything as changing for the future, because it needs to change for the future. And if those jobs of the future are going to be tech jobs, which again have an impact on diversity, if you look at the number of women who are in those industries, it's very low compared to other industries that we have been professional industries. So there's going to be an impact on diversity and inclusion and equality as well. But also on that vein of equality, you've also got what I call coding for chaos, which is you've got look at the people and the personality and the types who not just do the coding, but own technology. they tend to be a particular type of what I call socially awkward individual, typically men, based on data of the past. So we've got real problems there about how we look at technology and intellectual property, and how do you who pays for and who owns intellectual property and patents, and all of that needs to be talked about as well. And then I talk to other politicians who say, well, you know, there's so many, what we need women to do is go look after our elderly and go back to caring. And that's how communities are going to be. We're going to become a caring community, which is great. We should be a caring community. But why has it got to be just women who do that? So there are a lot of steps that I think could end up being quite backward. And when it comes to the ownership of capital, so with the Labour Party, when they made the announcement about a windfall tax, I couldn't quite believe they were saying it, because I said to them, so where are the companies registered that you're going to collect this windfall tax from? It's not the energy companies who've made a huge amount, it's the oil and gas companies, and they're not in the UK unless North Sea oil. But you know, where are these companies going to be registered? It'll be the Davos type model of ownership and asset ownership. And we've got to do something about that. We can't have these companies. I think we need to open all the registers globally. I mean, with Ukraine, the way we've collaborated globally and with the EU, I think is a model for us going forward about how we collaborate in opening up registers of assets and ownership and tax, and how we play a global tax and how we bring that into domicile. There are lots of things here. It's almost... So there's so much to talk about, but we are not really doing enough about it at the moment, I'm afraid.
We talked about how to tackle the right-wing media.
Right-wing media. Right-wing media, online media, I think all of it. Well, the online bill, again, is something better than nothing, and I think the fact that it's one of the things I campaigned for and gave evidence on is they're going to get rid of anonymous accounts. That's a start, which is going to be fantastic. But I would like to say that I don't think our media should be owned by foreign ownership. Is something I would stop immediately. I think our media should be owned by domestic conglomerates or people, whatever it is. But foreign ownership is a problem, because that allows money to be very dark money to infiltrate our media and our TV, in everything we're seeing happening at the moment in Ukraine, in Russia, and in other parts of the world. But I think we have to fight back to the media. If the media is not going to respond to what the real concerns of the country, then you've got great media springing up, like Bylines, New European, other online sources. Young people are not reading mainstream media. And if you look at the readership and the figures of a lot of these newspapers and you pick them up, they're about this thin at the moment because they're not getting the readership they have. So we have to find, how do we communicate our messages on those platforms that they are accessing? And that's why the way we police online is very important, because at the moment it's a bit too much of a free-for-all. And the loudest voices get away with the loudest message, which often isn't the truth. But yes, we have to change the way we communicate. But I'd go back and say we also have to educate differently. So if we look at the curriculum and start talking about human rights, about what it is, how our economy works, how profit works, how taxation works, how what I call responsible capitalism could work, we need to tackle these things from all angles. There is no one solution, I don't think, for any of the problems that we're facing. And that's including the messaging of the media and the media moving towards the right.
I wondered why you decided to start a new political party, because a lot of, rather than hitch your wagon to somebody else, I suppose, particularly like the Dems.
So I'd been asked a few times. But if I want to challenge the status quo and say that what we're trying to do is very ambitious, I don't have time for legacy issues. I don't have time for infighting. We have to have a clean sheet and be very focused on what we are trying to achieve. We're a proper party. We don't have to be here forever. We have one aim, which is to get the Tories out in 2024 through the message way we think it's achievable. And that's all I'm interested right now. I'll fight the future battle in the future. But that's how I've always campaigned. I've been a campaigner for 33 years. And I have always fought on a very focused issue basis. And I think that's the only way of doing this right now.
So if we look at the quality of the individuals in the cabinet, it's not very high. It's not much better in the shadow cabinet.
You're not going to ask me who's going to take over from Boris, are you?
You mentioned in your kind of introduction, how do you attract better quality of people into politics generally?
It's a problem we have not just in politics, but I think in industries everywhere, actually everywhere, but politics in particular. And we have to tackle the lack of trust and the fact that, why would you want to go into this profession that nobody actually trusts and nobody has any respect for? It's not, and also really it's not remunerated in a proper way either. So I think we have to create a status for politicians. We have to create change of culture, checks and balances, so they know that it will attract other people who are also like me, rather than other people who, will bully me, and their status and their school and everything else means that they get the jobs in the future, they'll be promoted and I won't. So more of a meritocracy rather than a kleptocracy in a way. But also, I think we have to start looking at maybe the idea of limiting terms in politicians, as some other countries do. Because career politicians, when the idea of career politicians came around, the idea that we needed to be more professional, rather than somebody who was landed gentry, and the whole legacy of politicians. But I think we've gone too far the other way now. We've got people who just think it's a job for life, irrespective of, they sort of rely on people not turning out to vote, or they can be there and they're well known and they're well paid and they'll get away with it. So I think we have to debate maybe having time limits, having an oath, something they're going to be bound by, legislation they'll be bound by might put off quite a few people from entering into Parliament. So if we create a different culture, better governance, better transparency, and more accountability, but also shorter time periods and better paid while you are, then maybe that will start bringing in a different group of people.
I think it's almost the key to everything else you talked about. Unless you get a better quality of people into Parliament in the first place, I think it's very difficult to push through the rest of the agenda.
It is, and I think, it is people, because politics is about people. It's a people business. For us, that's why it's going to be really important that we choose local people who actually, there are good politicians across all the parties, but they get caught up when they're there. So they start off with good people, and what happens is they become corrupted because of the system that's there. And I've seen that time and time again, not just in the UK, but around the world. And that's why checks and balances are so important. Yes, it's getting in the right people, but it's ensuring that there is less ability for them to be corrupted once they're in.
One of the core strengths of the Brexit party was its clear message around Brexit. And I was looking from what you were saying, what's your core issue? And your last answer was your core issue is to be anti-Tory. But that's not really very distinctive, because there's the SNP, there's Labour, there's Lib Dem who... That's not our core, no. Our core is cleaning up politics. What your core... No, our core is cleaning up politics. Right. That's the core of what we do. But to do that, we've got to get the Tories out. It's just they go together. Yeah, which one first? Yeah, exactly. Chicken and egg.
It seems to be quite a bad time with energy prices going up, fuel prices going up, and as I work in the renewable energy business, and I can see this as being fantastic, as them saying, right, it's great to be off our kind of dependence on Russian gas and what have you, and to go towards renewable, or it could go the other way, and we could start fracking and going, crazy that way. Do you see this way in which we force government to lean towards keeping going with renewable, tidal energy, things that we could be fantastic at because we've got the best resources probably in the world for wind and tidal, rather than to go back to the fossil fuel?
again, been arguing it will be on our manifesto that we've got to become a sustainable island. And that means from food and energy. I mean, we are in a very precarious, insecure place in so many ways. And food and energy are two of the biggest ones, apart from peace in the environment. But then actually the energy and environment go together again. But I worry about the fracking. I think this has given them an excuse, and Rees-Mogg is ahead, leading this charge. I think we have to be very careful of that. But the thing is about the energy price and what might happen is it could be that the fallout of what happens with us cutting off supplies from Russia is that we get closer to America. The EU and the UK becomes closer to America and to Saudi. And that is something that worries me, because we don't want to get closer to the Saudis. We don't. I mean, look, this weekend alone, they've executed 80 odd people. I mean, it's abhorrent beyond belief that we're even contemplating doing more business with them, but we are. And I think when it comes to the US is going to try and flood Europe and the UK, I think, with cheap energy. So, we have to make the most of it, but it's really, really important that we keep on the government's agenda for having, not just for the people who are on grid, but I do worry about the people off grid. There are millions of people in this country who are off grid, who are suffering at the moment, and really oil prices, they're ignored. And we've got to have alternative energies that mean, or sources of energy which sustains not just people on grid but off grid as well. Oh.
You first became famous, if I may say that, because of your involvement in the anti-Brexit movement. You have said a lot about it. Do you think that that's something which has to be put to one side in this reform campaign?
I think it does for two reasons. One is the door's not open to us. I speak to Brussels. I mean, I was a part of a convoy to Ukraine for medical supplies over the weekend, and we talked to Brussels about lots of these things, but the door is not open. So, we can want to join the club, but they're not having us. It's not even closed. It's locked. So no time soon. But the other thing is, we are not making ourselves more attractive. They don't trust Boris. They don't trust this government. And every time we talk about, all the way through COVID, being the best, we're the front runner, we present things in a way that are making things worse. We're not trying to be in any way good neighbours. And as long as we've got politicians who are making capital out of that division and out of putting down and repositioning the way other countries are achieving or working. I tried so hard when the Oxford vaccine was developing to say it's a great opportunity to talk about the fact that it was Italian scientist working alongside our scientists developing it with vials that came from, that could have been a really global message of how we came together and we were dealing with this together. But nobody was interested in government. They were not interested in that message at all. But so we have to prove that we are worth it, if that makes sense, before we can go to that conversation. And then the second thing is that Europe is changing, and what's happening in Ukraine will have a massive impact on Europe. So we need to see, or Europe itself needs to see, where it is over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So it's just not the time. Let's sort ourselves out here first, and let's see where they are, and then we join up again and have that discussion.
How do you stop getting painted as, but they just want anti-Brexit, but, it's Gina Miller again, she just wants us to rejoin the EU because everything else, and it's an interesting question because everything else you talk about tonight has been nothing to do with that. It's been very clear your focus is on the real important issues in society. How do you stop the Fail, the Express, etc., just painting that, but it's just that lot, the voters want to?
Well, so far, they haven't, which has been strange. And if I tell you the people who I've had support from, I've had the right-wing, non-democratic because she took over, those sorts of ones. But, I'll give you 3 people who were on social media when we launched, who defended or stood up for what I was doing and said, at least she's trying to do, was Tim Montgomery, Toby Young and Isabella Oxshott. And I thought, there's something very strange. I'm in an alternative universe here. Maybe they'd all gone drinking out together and just sort of misread what I'd said. But no, it's and
They saw a new political party. I thought you were going to
no, but also people who've closed their checkbook to the Conservative Party or Brexit MPs are talking to us on a daily basis because they're actually worried. Because the comment you made, it's not just Boris, it's everyone who's around that table at the moment. And they've lost, even though they might not have agreed with me, they've lost that sense of competency and they're worried about what happens next. Because if you think about around that table at the moment, there's a book, Unchained Britain, and the authors were Kwasi Kwarteng, Liz Truss, Dominic Raab, Priti Patel, Rishi Sunak, and I can't remember who, but they're all around that table. And so this is not, I don't know how, if it happened by accident, I do think it happened by accident or misfortune, is that Boris is not ideologically driven, but they are. And I think we have to be very careful what comes next. You know, we think things can't get any worse. If Liz Truss, who is number one at the moment, does take over, and she keeps calling herself, she addresses herself as Mrs. T in the third person now, which is so... if she is, it'll be very interesting, because the other thing we have to do, which is why I'm not too worried about the press right now, because we're building the grassroots, our infrastructure, local chapters, regional chapters, getting people to join, speaking to students, going around the country. Because if Boris does badly, if they do badly in the May election and there is a leadership challenge, we don't know who we're fighting yet, because it will be a very different thing if they say, I hear rumours it's got to be a woman apparently. If it's Liz Truss, that's a very different proposition to if it's Penny Mordaunt. So we don't really know yet who it is we're actually up against. I actually personally want Boris to stay. Because even though he's riding high on Ukraine and he's in a Churchill at the moment, at some point he'll just be himself. He can't help it. So I think our best chance is for him to stay there, but we don't know yet. So we have to concentrate on building from the ground up and doing the work we need to do now. But the media have oddly been quiet. And I don't know if they can't figure out what we are up to, and if they're expecting us to flip to, rejoin message, whatever it is they expect, or if they're genuinely concerned. Because intelligent people across the country, irrespective of which party you belong to or how you voted in Brexit, are worried. They can see that we don't have leadership. And they can see that the world is changing and Britain is going to be left behind.
Two more questions.
So I suppose following on from that is, how do you see Britain's international role, given that the Ukraine crisis has produced a complete shift in Germany's role? You held Scholz's speech to the Bundestag. Where do we sit now? And where do we sit in the future?
It's very concerning, because the people who we're standing up to are people like India and Modi, and a very right-wing leader. And if Pakistan is now supporting Russia and we're now getting closer to India, the geopolitical shifting of that on its own is seismic enough. But then where does Japan land? Who does America get closer to? If NATO comes out of this being stronger, more united, which it wasn't before, do we have to then fall in line when it comes to NATO? So we don't know. There are so many outcomes of where this might go. We could well be either left behind or be quite an important player, depending on where it lands at the end of this crisis, wherever that is. And also, if we end up with a new Iron Curtain, we don't know what that might look like. I think the biggest player who will decide the fate of the world is China right now. Who they decide to support, how they decide to support them, where they decide to align, if they're seen as being the ones who came out against Russia and are being seen as a hero country who avoided World War III, then how does that affect how we have our international relationships with them? And is it really us that you want to have that relationship with, or is it going to be America, somehow China and America become closer? There is a lot of uncertainty here about where we end up. And I think it could be a real possibility that we end up, out of necessity, having to be closer to Europe.
We're still committed to the Common European Defence Fund. We're still committed forces to it. We're still feeling the pinch of losing the Atlanta from Northwood. We know we've got.
We might have no choice.
That's why we've got no other option.
Yeah, that's why I think right now, let's concentrate on that, because I think things might end up in quite a different place without us having to try too hard.
Never drop your enemy, always make a mistake.
Yep, never.
Could you just say a very few words about how you're going to take the campaign forward?
Okay, so as I said, right now it's about building our grassroots support, getting people to follow us on Twitter, to become members. Once we set up our regional chapters, it's going out and spreading the word, getting influencers, vloggers, podcasts, getting as much media attention away from the away from the traditional media as we can as possible, because the more voices we can have being ambassadors for us, the better. But what we'll do is do that over this time coming up to September, because I think once COVID dies down in Ukraine, we don't know how long that will go, but it won't be in the headlines forever. And once we know that leadership in the Labour and Conservative Party, what that will look like, and we come out with more and more policies on a regular basis in September, then we need people to get supporting behind us and building, because we can't do this alone. If you look at, I spoke to Macron's team, in Poland there was a team called COD, Coalition for Democracy, who were actually a civic organisation that then became a challenger party. I've looked at lots of the models, and it begins with you. It begins with voters, it begins with people getting out and telling people, look, there is a choice, this is the battle we've got at the moment, this is a challenge, this is the message, this is how we can make it, we can fix the system, and then if you want to go back to your tribes or how you were before, that's fine. But right now, lend us your vote, lend the True and Fair Party the vote to fix the system so that we get on to the next stage. That's basically the message we want to get out there. Thank you.
Thank you.